Bible talks about a worldwide flood, of a worldwide flood, of a worldwide flood. If there really was a worldwide flood, what would the evidence be?
Welcome to Creation Foundation, where we discuss things from a biblical point of view. I'm Dick Temple.
And I'm Mark Finkbeiner.
And I'm Greg Morgan.
You know, we're talking about the Ken Ham Bill Nye debate again. And there's a number of things that we aren't even going to have time to cover, but one thing that really bugs me is something Ken Ham said. He said that creationists and evolutionists have the same information, but the conclusions are often a matter of ideology. Well, the statement is true, except what information does the average American citizen have? What information do you have? Politically correct textbooks, Nature Channel, National Geographic, Discover Magazine? Is there some crucial information missing here? Ken Ham said that when he looks at the Grand Canyon, he sees thousands of years, while Bill Nye sees millions of years. But what would you see if you tried to apply observational science to your examination of the Grand Canyon? The first step in observational science is to ask yourself questions. So let's just look at some questions that you'd want to ask yourself if you wanted to find out how the Grand Canyon came to be. What does the Colorado River look like? Well, that's pretty simple. I mean, it's obvious you're going to look, but what does it really look like? And what do other North American rivers look like? And what do the ends of these rivers look like? And what do you find at each end of the Grand Canyon? And where did all the dirt go? So observational science will answer the question of how long it took to form the Grand Canyon if you simply seek out the answers to these questions. To begin with, all the rivers start high and run downhill following the course of least resistance. I mean, obvious. I mean, we all know that, but did we think about it? All the rivers have a delta proportional to their flow. Again, something that's pretty obvious, but it's worth noting because it makes a difference. Now, there is a lot of the Colorado River upstream from the Grand Canyon, and it flows through what used to be a lake about the size of Utah. And as it flows through this big lake, or what used to be a big lake, it does not create a huge, deep canyon. And the Kaibab upwarp, which contains the Grand Canyon, was the west wall of a huge lake. So that when the Colorado River cut through the Kaibab upwarp and spread out without continuing to cut a canyon downstream. So we have a Grand Canyon through the Kaibab upwarp, but no canyon upstream and no canyon downstream. And the dirt from the canyon is spread all across Southern California, extending into Arizona. So the water in that huge lake breached the dam, cut the canyon, but as soon as it got past the canyon, the wall of the dam, then it hit the level ground and spread out and dumped the dirt. Now, would you rather view the Grand Canyon from a politically correct bias or a scientifically correct bias? Scientifically correct is the way it is. Politically correct is the way the government wants you to think it is. Well, this is very basic to doing science, asking yourself questions. It'll carry you through a whole lot of other things besides scientific discussions. Asking these sort of questions will help you a whole lot in your relationship with people. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Mark and share what you noticed from what Bill Nye had to say.
One of the things he brought up was the Big Bang. He showed a slide of a church that had on their reader board something about the Big Bang, and I thought, well, let's talk about that. Because I'll tell you, in order to believe in this Big Bang model, it takes more faith than what I have. And I'm going to show you why. You see, according to the evolutionist timeline, this Big Bang happened. It could, according, you know, I've heard all kinds of estimates, and they can never really quite make up their mind. I've heard as old as 20 billion years ago, and NASA is saying that the universe is 13.73 billion years old. Let's take a look at some of these science textbooks that the children are reading in the government-funded schools about the Big Bang, okay? And here's one in this textbook, HBJ General Science, 1989, page 362. In the realm of the universe, it says, nothing really means nothing. Wow, that's something great to teach the kids to have a lot of self-esteem. No wonder why there's so many school shootings in the government schools. Not only matter and energy would disappear, but also space and time. However, physicists theorize that from this state of nothingness, the universe began in a gigantic explosion about 16.5 billion years ago. Here's what the Scientific American says about the Big Bang. The observable universe could have evolved from an infinitesimal region. It's then tempting to go one step further and speculate that the entire universe evolved from literally nothing. How do you get something from nothing? That violates the first law of thermodynamics. Wow, see, they have a lot more faith than I do. In Prentice Hall, here's what their general science textbook says, 1992, page 61. How was the universe born, and how will it end? Most astronomers believe that about 18 to 20 billion years ago, all the matter in the universe was concentrated into one very dense, very hot region that may have been much smaller than the period on this page. For some unknown reason, this region exploded. This explosion is called the Big Bang. Now, did you notice what it just said there? That this Big Bang, it all started out in a region that was smaller than a period on this printed text page. Wow, that's a lot of faith, because now continue on here. Now, this is Prentice Hall, now 1991. It says, all the matter and energy will once again be packed into a small area. This area may be no bigger than the period at the end of this sentence. Then another Big Bang will occur. A Big Bang may occur once every 80 to 100 billion years. Well, now get this, people. They want you and me to believe that this Big Bang started out with this little tiny period about the size of the period on the printed text page, and that all the matter in the universe came from there. You and I came from there, the chickens and the cats and the dogs and all the galaxies, everything came from that little period. That tiny little infinitesimal region that we now call a dot. Now, how do you get all of this, everything you see, from a little dot? Now, I'm going to tell you, that's miraculous. And that takes even more faith than what I've got to believe that. Now I'm going to tell you something. Every school should have a merry-go-round, because we're going to disprove the Big Bang right here. So this is what you do. You get a whole bunch of kids on the merry-go-round. You get your football team from your local high school, and they begin to spin this merry-go-round around and around and around and around and around. Okay? So here you are in phase 1, and the kids, they're just holding on. Then we hit phase 2. Phase 2 is when the hair is blowing back and sweat's coming off their face. Phase 3, they are screaming in desperation to please stop, slow down. Phase 4 is when the kids, they're being spun around the merry-go-round so fast that they begin to fly off that merry-go-round. And as long as they don't hit a tree with resistance, they'll be fine. But when these kids begin to fly off the merry-go-round, I want to ask you a question. Now, this is what I ask all my kids that I teach science. I ask them, now, which way are these kids going to spin when they come off this merry-go-round? Because remember, the Big Bang, according to the Big Bang, the evolutionary fundamentalists, that believe in the Big Bang, they believe that this little dot got there from somewhere where they can't tell us where, and that this little dot, it began to spin, and it spun, and it spun, and it spun, and it spun, and then finally there was this kind of like an explosion, and then everything we see in the universe came to be from this little dot, okay? So now think about that. This little dot is spinning, and so these kids are also spinning on this merry-go-round. Now, which way are the kids going to spin when they come off the merry-go-round? Are they going to go the opposite way of the way the merry-go-round is spinning, or are they going to spin the same direction as the merry-go-round is spinning? Well, the right answer is they're going to spin the same direction as the merry-go-round, because that's what we call the conservation of angular momentum. Now, you could call the Big Bang historical science, because nobody observed that, all right? But what do we see in observable science? Well, here's what we see in observable science. First of all, like I said, we have the conservation of angular momentum, which states that, that an object that is shot out radially will spin in the same direction that it came from, okay? So what do we see? What do we observe in outer space? Well, here's what we observe. We notice that Venus and Uranus, they rotate backwards from the other planets. Oops. 6 of the 63 moons rotate backwards. Jupiter, Saturn, and Neptune have moons orbiting in both directions. Oops. And that comes from the Astronomical Almanac. Okay? Moons in both directions. We have the Jupiter, where this one moon called Lo, it's spinning in one direction, and then it has other moons that are spinning in other directions, okay? All right, now here's an interesting one, Uranus. Uranus is actually turning elliptical, okay? So most planets and moons, they're spinning like this, but Uranus is actually tumbling like this as it's going around the sun, okay? So see, this all hurts the Big Bang model, okay? Well, here's what Sir Fred Hoyle said about the Big Bang. He says, I have little hesitation in saying that a sickly pall now hangs over the Big Bang theory. And you can see the documentation there. Okay, now, how about the age of the universe? Now, in 1770, George Buffon said the Earth was 70,000 years old. In 1905, the age of the Earth was officially 2 billion years old, according to Newsweek, July 20th, 1998. The Minneapolis Tribune, Monday, August 25th, 1969, said the official age of the Earth and Moon was 3.5 billion years old. Today, students are taught it is 4.6 billion years old, but I think they've upped that even since several years ago. Okay, so what does all this mean? Well, this means that the Earth has been getting older at a rate of 21 million years per year for the last 220 years. That means the universe and the Earth has been aging for 40 years every minute, per minute, okay? There's one thing I just can't quite get off my mind about this other thing that Bill Nye brought up, and I talked about this in the last program, where Bill Nye was saying that evolution makes all these predictions, and I talked about Tiktaalik, you know, the so-called missing link between fish and tetrapods, which is a four-legged animal, you know, and we found footprints in Poland that, according to the evolutionists, are like 379 million years old, which would mean that Tiktaalik would be 18 million years older than that, which of course destroys the idea that Tiktaalik is a missing link between fish and tetrapods, okay? Well, I began to think about this. I thought, well, what about all the ape men that are talked about in the science textbooks? Those were all predictions made by evolutionists. They made a prediction about this one so-called ape man called Nebraska Man. And they built this Nebraska Man. They even drew a picture of him and his wife of what they would look like built around a tooth that they found in Nebraska. Okay? Well, then later on we found out that this tooth came from an extinct pig. The first pig to make a monkey out of an evolutionist. Okay, well, that was a prediction that they made, and they were wrong. Piltdown man, they were wrong. Okay, Peking man, they were wrong. Okay, and then Neanderthal man. We found out that Neanderthal man was just a fully developed man, but he was big and burly, and he could throw the biggest quarterback or the biggest football player over the fence. Okay, now I want you to understand something. We have this website, creationfoundations.org. It's our television website. And you can go on there and you can read this article that is exposing every ape-man, supposed ape-man, in the science textbooks, showing how they were either frauds or just bad science. Okay? So I want you to be able to read that. In Prentice Hall, Earth Science, it says, many scientists believe that the extinction of the dinosaurs was caused by the collision of an asteroid 65 million years ago. How might such a collision have caused this to happen? Well, my question is, why did it only kill off the dinosaurs? Why didn't it kill off everything else? Why just the dinosaurs that were living then? And if it had killed off all the dinosaurs and everything else, again, then how are you going to get something from nothing if it killed off everything? But according to this, it only killed off the dinosaurs. You know, how would the dinosaurs evolve into birds if the asteroid killed off all the dinosaurs? I guess this is joke time. And then look at this one. This is in the International Falls, Minnesota News. It says, new theory about how the dinosaurs were killed off. They said, lack of oxygen, not an asteroid killed the dinosaurs. I wish they could make up their mind about their predictions. Oh, this is my favorite one. A scientist from Indiana has even suggested the startling theory, this would be startling, that the dinosaurs killed them off with their own gas, flatulence. They had a flatulence party. The methane they produced caused the Earth's atmospheric temperature to warm up, creating a kind of greenhouse effect. This might have increased global warming to a point to where dinosaurs could not stand the heat. This comes from the Young Oxford Book of the Prehistoric World. Okay, and so then that brings us back to coelacanth again. You know, they made a prediction that this lobe fish had died off 70 million years ago, and then we find it again, living, you know. And so anyway, well, I've had a little bit of fun. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Greg.
One of the other things that Bill Nye said.
Furthermore, you can find places in the Grand Canyon where you see an ancient riverbed on that side going to an ancient riverbed on that side, and the Colorado River has cut through it.
I've been to the Grand Canyon several times. I even hiked from the south rim down to the bottom and then up the trail to the north rim. I've never seen such a riverbed. I had the privilege of taking this photograph, which does show standing on the north rim. So what you're looking at here is the south wall leading to the north rim. And so I'm wondering, where is that riverbed that he's talking about? Is it in here? I don't see it. Perhaps it's on the top of this layer. Again, I don't see it. This layer? I don't see it. There are 10 major layers there, and I don't see a riverbed between any of them. There are lots of places where they could be, but they're not. And I used a road atlas, went across each state, so there's a full page on that state. I went across east to west and counted all the rivers, flipped it over, looked at the next state, counted all the rivers, and big enough to show on the road atlas, there is one river every 31 miles on average. Well, the Grand Canyon is 177 river miles long. That's well over 100 miles long. It should have, therefore, at least 3 riverbeds on the top of each of these 10 layers. I don't see any of them. No matter how closely I look, I don't see any such riverbeds. Aside from Bill Nye, I'm not aware of any scientist who claims to have found one. There are a few places in here where they do find evidence of erosion between the layers, where one layer was laid down, and then there was erosion on top of that layer before the next layer was laid down. But that is always sheet erosion, where there's a wide area of water that was flowing across, eroded something down, that flow stopped, and the next layer was laid down on top of it. The sheet erosion is consistent with something called a global flood. When you've got sheet erosion occurring over several hundred miles, that's not a river. That's something like a global flood. But you can find lots of photographs all over the place. You can find photographs of the Grand Canyon, and you'll not find a single riverbed between the layers. In fact, you won't find riverbeds between any layers anywhere on the planet. You will occasionally find where there are caves which have collapsed. You will find sheet erosion, but there are no such rivers. Bill Nye said something that, sorry Bill, but what you said simply isn't true. There are no such rivers. And that's one of the biggest arguments that creationists have for saying that the flood explains the Grand Canyon, and uniformitarian theories do not explain the Grand Canyon. I'd also like to talk a little bit about the wave at Paria. I had just gotten to the point where I was confident enough that I stood up in public and I said that there are no riverbeds between the layers. Therefore, that's strong evidence that the earth is not ancient, but it is consistent with the Bible. And a week after I made those pronouncements, I saw a photograph of the wave at Paria. And literally, my blood ran cold. I broke out in a cold sweat. I felt appalled because I thought that was a riverbed between the layers, and that I had just given false testimony. Well, it took me 2 weeks of studying the photographs and praying, and I realized that's not evidence for riverbed between the layers, and the USGS does not claim that that's a riverbed. There we're in agreement. But rather, that is something called soft sediment deformation. Now, the U.S. Geological Society says that it was all the weight of rock above that caused this rock to slide and deform. Well, excuse me, here you find in the photograph, here is a whirlpool in that rock, and above it there's an even bigger whirlpool. I only know one way to put whirlpools into sandstone. Let's start with flowing mud. The wave is an example of a huge underwater landslide that deposited all these layers. It also has sliding features in it, and it has twisted and deformed rock. And that twisting and deformation could not have occurred after it turned to rock, because it would break the rocks if it was doing that, unless it was heated a great deal, and there's no evidence of heating and evidence that it was not heated, including fossils that have survived that would have been burnt up if it had been heated that much. So the wave is tremendous evidence, again, for Noah's flood, and since it's only about 70 miles north of the Grand Canyon and is in a layer that used to extend across the Grand Canyon, the wave is evidence that says the Grand Canyon was laid down by the same sort of major flood. All across the world you'll find evidence like that. Nowhere in the world do you find riverbeds between the layers, contrary to what Bill Nye said. But frequently on the earth, you look at the rocks and you find that they are distorted badly without having been heated. That is tremendous evidence that something really dramatic happened during Noah's flood. It got laid down, and then huge earthquakes and huge rock movements, but it wasn't rock yet. It was huge mud movements, and then it turned into rock. And Bill Nye says that it takes a huge amount of time for rocks to develop. To start with mud, it takes a long time for it to become a rock. Well, anyone who's poured concrete knows it doesn't take millions of years. It takes the right kind of rock and the right conditions, or the right mud and the right conditions. But also, naturally, we have seen mud that is formed into rocks. And there are companies go around, if you find that a foundation of a building is on rock, on soil that is too soft, they will go around and spread a chemical on it. It'll seep into the soil and turn huge areas of soil into rock. It doesn't take millions of years, it takes the right conditions. As long as you've got particles and you've got a cementing agent, something like Portland cement, but also many others will do that, it only takes 5 years, perhaps 100 years for that to happen. Including at Mount St. Helens, there was a huge landslide, which then turned into rock, and a later explosion of that volcano carved out a canyon, and there the rock stands firm. It's already got a good wall on it, and it's solid rock less than a decade after it was laid down. So it doesn't take millions of years, doesn't even take thousands of years. It only takes the right conditions. And that's what we find all over the world.
Well, I'd like to add a little bit here for us non-geologists. You showed that picture of the Grand Canyon looking across at the wall. And you say, well, there's no rivers cutting through. Okay, we can imagine, well, you just got the picture in the wrong place. But notice all the layers are flat, relatively flat. One layer on top of another layer on top of another layer. There's no erosion, other than the sheet erosion that you mentioned. So that this had to happen quickly, one layer on top of another on top of another. I have a good friend that is a geologist that was teaching in college, and his course was canceled. He was teaching geology. His course was canceled because he would take his students on field trips along the Columbia River Gorge and point out the science involved in the laying down of the layers of basalt in the Columbia Gorge. And once they looked at what he was explaining to how things worked, and they looked for themselves in the Columbia Gorge, they could see this did not match up with evolutionary theory. Well, the college was afraid they would lose their accreditation, so they canceled his course. I believe, Mark, you mentioned the fossil ape man. There is a book, The Bone Peddlers, written shortly after Ronald Reagan ran for president, because Ronald Reagan had made a statement about creation being something that was viable as a science of origins. And this created a furor among the evolutionists. And they made comments like, so many thousand fossils in the Smithsonian Institute proved that that was wrong. So this one evolutionist newspaper reporter said, what's all the fuss about? He'd taken some courses in geology and anthropology. So he decided to check into it. So he just did a factual report on the various so-called ancestors of humans. Same ones that Mark mentioned, plus a whole bunch more, every one he could find. He listed the date they were discovered, who discovered them, and when they were, the date when they were proven to be wrong, and why they were proven to be either ape or human. That book, you know, no one bothered to check it out. I mean, here's an evolutionist. He wrote it. It's called The Bone Peddlers. The Macmillan published it. It went out. It was in libraries all across the country. It was for sale on bookstores. Dr. Chittick bought a copy of it. Well, he read the book, thought, this is fantastic. He loaned it to a friend, and you know when you loan a book to a friend, you're not going to get it back. So he went down to the bookstore. Just 2 weeks after he'd bought the first one, when there was lots on the shelf, there wasn't a book to be found. Nowhere. In fact, it was jerked out of the libraries. I have a couple of copies. You know, they came from libraries and made it out to the book market. When the evolutionists finally read the book, they went to Macmillan. You sell school textbooks? You want to continue to sell school textbooks? Maybe you should make this book scarce. And within 2 weeks, that book disappeared. The evidence is out there, folks. but we're dealing in a world of political correctness. Don't forget our website that Mark mentioned to you. You'll find a tremendous amount of information. Talk to you next time. God be with you.
If there really was a worldwide flood, what would the evidence be?